This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen, your host. Since 2010, we've been broadcasting sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world. I invite you to listen and change how you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about the psychology of healthy attachment and how to forge satisfying relationships in an uncertain world. My guest today is Dr. Kelley. She is a licensed psychologist in private practice specializing in couples therapy focused on an integrative, attachment-based relational approach. Anne and her wife, Sue Marriott, are co-authors of Secure Relating, Holding Your Own in an Insecure World, and produce the critically acclaimed podcast, Therapy Uncensored. Secure Relating delivers hope, connection, and empowerment amidst the many barriers of emotional closeness and provocations towards self-protection by offering a comprehensive approach to understanding and transforming all kinds of relationships into more secure and satisfying bonds. Welcome, Anne. Thanks for joining me today.
So excited to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, a pleasure. Let's just talk about us humans and our need and desire to attach and connect, and why it's so important that we do it in a healthy way.
Oh, absolutely. So as we come into this world, right, our whole body has to have other people take care of us. For those that have learned uber independence and think we can be out there in the world on our own, it's just a fallacy, because we come into the world needing people, and our body knows it. And our body learns ways to connect. It has to adapt because all of our environments are very different, depending on our race, depending on our family history. We come into the world, we have to assess what our particular environment is. And then our body has to learn, how do I keep people close to me in this environment? And how do I protect myself when things get too threatening? And as we go about learning that, and it starts in utero, but it also, the first relationships that you have in the first year of life and with your primary caregiver really sets the stage for how that wiring happens. You learn so much about your body and about how to keep yourself close and your environment. And so if, for example, you have a mom that tends to be really, really anxious, and you cry and express distress, and when you do, your mom gets really, really anxious and kind of moves away from you and gets overwhelmed, you quickly learn kind of how to monitor your body to adjust to her. You mentioned regulation. You learn to regulate yourself, but it's all about co-regulation, right? It's all about, how do I keep my mom's body safe enough to be there for me? And I'm going to learn to do that. Then my mom, or whatever caregiver, whichever caregiver, learns to read me. And so this beautiful co-regulation dance is really what we mean by attachment. How do we learn to engage with our caregiver to keep ourselves safe? The interesting thing about that is attachment very much impacts our wiring. The hormones that gets released, the type of wiring that gets connected, it impacts what makes us feel threatened. It impacts what kind of information that we attend to in the environment. And with all these repeated patterns, it's kind of like a ski slope, right? Like as you ski down the same slope over and over again, You have these like really, these grooves that don't take much energy. And that's how our wiring is. And it starts from the very first year of life. We start to learn over and over through repetition. This is how I'm wired. And this is, I don't need to pay attention to this kind of emotion because it scares the heck out of my dad. So instead, every time I stay really calm, so I'm going to learn to regulate my body and stay really calm and maybe not even pay attention to my emotions that much. Because when I do, that doesn't help me. But when I'm calm, that helps me. But the interesting thing about that is that, so we learn what to pay attention to and we learn what not to pay attention to. But all of this happens unconsciously and implicitly before we have language. So we don't even know it, but it's all stored in our body. And so it's about learning, what are your patterns? What did you learn? And how did you learn to stay connected to people or protect yourself from the ideas of disconnection?
And attachment theory, or how we attach to our primary caregivers, it's very helpful to understand it. But what I think that you are really exploring in your book, Secure Relating, is a new paradigm for that looks at how do we do that for ourselves and in the context of our relationships today, which I think is super important because it's present and future minded, not in the rearview mirror.
Very much so. And what it really is that our model is incorporating that. The research, attachment is probably one of the most solid psychological outcomes that we have studied in any time. It still proves the test of time. But it started 70 years ago, and it's continued to have so much research done. And how does this play out? How does our early attachment impact us as kids, as in adult romantic relationships? It started out very much focused on the early bond, but our wiring doesn't stop at 18 months. Our wiring actually now we know continues throughout our entire lifetime, and other people impact it. So what we've done in our model, we call it the modern attachment regulation spectrum, is we've incorporated all of that science in a way that can be really usable. There's so much science. And what we try to do is take the most essential things that we think that can help people with this amazing science throughout the years. Really now a lot of inclusion about how our body's wired and neurobiology and how we regulate emotions. And we put it in a model that made it easy to use and easy to understand, because this is such rich information and it needs to be out for everybody to be able to apply it. And that's what our book's about, is let us give you the really need to know, but integrate it in a way that goes, oh, if I really understand these things about myself, this is deeply going to impact how I relate right now in my relationship with my husband or my wife or my children. And of course, how we relate in the world right now when we are so activated into fear and self-protection that we can't even find ourselves. And so we're relying on the science to say, whoa, we can do it. We can ground ourselves. Let's do this together.
And please share some of the pillars or the fundamentals of MARS, or the Modern Attachment Regulation Spectrum.
The primary part of MARS is thinking about attachment. We all like to categorize ourselves, right? Like if you know about Myers-Briggs, or we can number ourselves. We like categories.
Yes, we do.
We do. We all do, right? We like to put ourselves, I'm a Cancer, right? What does that mean to be a Cancer?
Too. Are you?
Yay!
Yes. Funny thing.
So it makes sense that we want to do this with attachment. And there are 4 categories that have been identified in research about how we typically attached as young and how it predicts our adult relationships. But the truth of the matter is that's a really research-driven concept. And none of us act just one way all the time with all people. It's just impossible. We all have different histories. We have these really universal patterns that we learn to protect ourselves, but we also have very individualized patterns. The center of MARS is, instead of here's the 4 categories, and this is how you behave in those categories, the center of it is a spectrum. And so imagine, for your listeners out there, it's an arrow, two-sided arrow, that imagine yourself with the left side of the arrow being really, really dark blue and facing down. And then as the spectrum evolves and travels, it moves into lighter and lighter shades of blue, all the way up to green, which is kind of the center where we call secure relating and secure attachment kind of happens. But then we travel all the way to the right and up. It starts to go, the arrow starts to go way, way up, and it gets darker and darker red. So that is the core of our Mars spectrum. And what that means is it's that part of it is about your state, right? You can start out in the morning feeling really great, and then you're running late for work, and then you drop apart, you miss a deadline. And by the end of it, you're way up and you're upregulated and you're pissed and you're angry. You're upset and you're angry. And in the Mars spectrum, that means your body's activating and upregulating. And we call that red because we tend to get hot when we go up there.
Indeed.
And and the thing that's so interesting, the further up you go on that spectrum, the more it changes all sorts of physiological things in your body. But we forget that. So we didn't start out that way. We started out our way pretty calm, and we were feeling caring with our kids and connected to our spouse. And by the time we get to work, we're way up here. That's going to change how we engage with everybody.
Indeed.
And it's going to change how we interpret the meeting that we're in, and whether that person was actually judging us or listening to us or cutting us off, and we forget that. And so we highlight the middle of the spectrum as really getting to know what are your biases in each state, because we want people to be more and more aware of their states. The next part of the spectrum is that we add our attachment maps. Let me describe. So there's 4 different ways that people generally start to adjust in their bodies for these different kind of threats that happened as kids, that are the 4 common classifications of attachment. So the person I've just described, but we tend to have patterns. So if you learn through your history that staying very alert in your environment and staying very aware of your environment really helped you keep your caregivers close, then you develop processes like being hypervigilant or very aware or maybe even preoccupied. The further up the continuum, of course, depends on what happened to you as a child, the further up you tend to have those red categories or those red tendencies. And so we like to help you think of, where does your attachment map fall on the spectrum? Because we're not all one thing, right? We're not just preoccupied. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And we are changeable and we are fickle. And as you said, that the shift in wiring persists throughout our lifetime, right? So we might have been born into a family of origin with a certain kind of structure or attachment style, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily carry it with us to the same degree throughout our lifetime.
Couldn't have said it better, right? And relationships and impact from systems impact our development and our belief, because it impacts, attachment really does impact not only our wiring, but also our cognitions and the way we think and our beliefs. And so if we've learned to travel way up red to keep ourselves safe, and for those of us that maybe have learned to really stay red, right? Like, again, you can be crimson,
spicy.
right? Spicy, right?
Spicy.
But even if you're not so red, right? You've learned to really stay attuned. So you're going to pick up all sorts of things in the environment that other people won't, which can be a real big strength. Don't get me wrong. Like, you're going to know if your kid's upset, you're going to know that your mom is feeling depressed. You're going to feel these things in your body, because guess what? Your body's tuned in and knows to listen, right? And so then if you're really far up there, you'd hang your attachment map, and we make it a map because it's a journey, but you're going to pin it. It's not labeled, and you're pretty far up there. Or maybe you're not so far up. Maybe you just tend to get a little distracted and preoccupied occasionally, or when things are upset, and you're much more close to the green, right? But here's the thing, maybe then you get involved and marry somebody who's really secure, like deeply lives in the green, what we call green. The thing that's really wonderful is that through co-regulation and through secure relating with each other, you really can impact those core wiring, and you can shift.
Yeah.
What we really stress in the book is that instead of just thinking about, okay, I think I have an insecure attachment and I think I'm preoccupied, how do I get secure attachment? That's a big journey. And who has time for it or the money for that? Don't get me wrong. I love that journey and I really believe in it, but it's a lot more hopeful and engaging to think, how do I get there through gradients? And so what we're focused on is how do you learn to securely relate? Because the more we securely relate with one another, guess what happens? It changes our body. And we have more secure connections with each other and we feel safer. So we regulate each other. And we then, through experiences, we actually move our map and we become more grounded to ourselves. And it's such a hopeful message.
Let me just throw something out there about executive functions. And when we are in the hot spot, when we're in the red, we are not using the reasoning brain, right? We're using the
Right.
hot brain, right? And
Yes.
that's not so good for us unless we are escaping a fire or an earthquake.
Really good point to say it that way. Yes. Right. You know, what happens when we're up on the red, and then we'll talk about going down to the blue
Yeah,
because
the blue's a good
many,
place.
well, for some of us, I'll give you, yeah, it does feel, if we run in the red, we think, God, it'd be such a relief to be in the blue, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think your point's really well taken is that the further up we go in a dysregulated state, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, the front part of our brain right behind our skull.
Leaves the
That is,
station.
leaves the station. And it's the last to develop and it's the first to go.
Yep.
Right. And so what takes over then is all this automatic learning that we've done, right? We forget, and so it's just our automatic learning just takes over. And a lot of that has to do with our early, really implicit learning. And so we're going to react and we're going to unfortunately see the stresses outside of ourselves. And our first thought is, if you would quit doing that, I'd quit feeling this. So stop doing that. But you're
Yep.
right. Your frontal lobe shuts down. And part of the goal of secure relating is, wait, how do I calm myself first? Put my own oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
Right. Because any tiny bit that we do that, each part sends the signal to our prefrontal cortex. Oh, wait, we're safe enough. Come back online. Come join us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need that.
And that we're really in control, right? I think why we get hot is we feel like we're out of control, like everything is happening out there and we have no dominion over it, right? So we get hot and then we lose it. And then we're really out of control. And then when we're able to sort of reconnect those two parts, things start to feel better, right? Because we're suddenly in control of ourselves again.
That's a great way to put it. It's kind of like you liken it to, like, let's say you had a huge fight with your spouse, right? And you're in the middle of the fight. And unfortunately, we seem to feel this. One thing that happens when we're highly upregulated is we feel this, you're doing this when you feel this urgency to act right now, right? And the higher up you are, the more you're in the present moment. The only thing that exists is this moment. And you forget the past and you forget the future, unless it applies to right now. And I can make my point about the past, right? You do remember the past, and you're scared of the future. But the threat exists right this second.
Yeah.
And you're scared to death. So you think you have this pressure to act. I got to make you hear, understand this, and I got to do it right now. Because if we don't, we forget that we're in a moment of activation. Instead, we think we're in life-threatening danger. We're communicating to our entire body, because usually when we're activated like that, we have that because it's life-threatening. You can't think when you're under life-threatening situations.
No.
But the problem with us is that when we lose our prefrontal cortex, our body goes, oh, no, you are really in trouble. I'm disappearing, and we're going to be really reactive. So the only thing that's important to us right now is that moment in time. And too often, we try to work out the most intricate, deep parts of our hurts and our disconnections in that very moment. And for most of us, it doesn't go so well.
No.
Right?
No, it doesn't go well at all.
And then the thing that's horrible about that is that we keep re-injuring each other, right? Because I'm already not feeling safe with you. And now I'm going to tell you all the ways you hurt me, but I'm going to do it in this aggressive, angry way or this withdrawn way. And then through co-regulation, your body's not going to fare so well. You're not going to like that. You're only going to see my ferocious face. and my eyes and I'm intensely looking at you and I'm right. And so your entire nervous system freaks out too.
Yeah.
And so you lose your prefrontal cortex, we have strategies to not do this, but this is a common example. And you lose it. And now you're responding with your worst self. And so as you do that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So now by the end of it, I'll speak as couples here, but this could be parent-child, friendship, brother, sister. But as a couple, what could be hard is that then we get these really entrenched patterns that stay and they get more and more ingrained, and we quit trusting each other because we see it coming. We can predict it.
Nobody's feeling safe in those moments. Nobody's feeling safe, and we're activated in some very primitive way, right back to, well, not quite the womb, but maybe close to it,
It's so true. Yes.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Dr. Ann Kelley. To learn more, please go to therapistuncensored.com, on Facebook at Austin Shrinks. I love that name. And the book we're talking about today is Secure Relating, Holding Your Own in an Insecure World. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back. And that is a promise. Harvesting Happiness is rooted in science. Our work facilitates applied positive psychology practices through media and consulting. We're committed to sound ideas for better well-being, leading to increased life satisfaction and a better world for everyone. We're not into pseudoscience or quick fixes. We're focused on common sense backed by rigorous research. Healthy critical thinking is the foundation for our discussions. We encourage you to challenge preconceptions and explore ideas with a curiously discerning mind. Collaboration with our guests is united by an inclusive vision to boost resilience, critical thinking, communication, and problem solving through civilized discourse and pleasurable relational engagement for everyone. Each day, we have the intellectual freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, regardless of external circumstances. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please seek support because good psychological health is vital to the achievement of a healthy and satisfying life. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial and educational services that boost emotional and social intelligence. And we're back, continuing the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Ann Kelley. We're talking about the psychology of healthy attachment and forging satisfying relationships in an uncertain world. Let's get back to it. All right. And we spoke about the spectrum in the first segment, that to one side is red, running on the hot side, and to the opposite side of the spectrum, we're talking about a little bit cooler blue region. A lot of us tend to run hot. I mean, I'm going to raise my hand that when I go hot, which is not very often. And I feel like I'm pushed there. And I say that facetiously.
I love that.
But there are those of us who tend to be a little cooler customers. Let's talk a little bit about that and why that may not be so optimal and a little fire might be good.
I love that. I love that. We spoke about like early experiences that shape us. And if an early experience in your life or throughout your growing up says that having emotions scares your caregiver or is judged, we have a lot more gender bias in this community because it's not just early mama learning, it's throughout and systemic learning. If we learn that having feelings is like judged or shamed or weak, and you're supposed to really know what you want and, have that rational thought, then you've learned what we call deactivate your attachment system. And that's a big concept. It'd be impossible to go through all here, but we go into a lot of depth in there. But deactivating your attachment system means that you've learned in your body to deactivate this part of you that can stay connected to people. So we have less words when we're there. We tend to not quite value other people. We tend to overvalue ourselves and our own opinions. So we can get stuck in kind of right, wrong thinking. And when we're over in the blue, we often think we're right and everybody else is wrong. I mean, anytime we're activated, we think that. But more so when you're in the blue, you kind of live more. If you live in the blue, you likely live more in this more logical, disconnecting from emotions and kind of right, wrong thinking. And identity is really, really important. And identity sometimes can be more important in what activates your threat system than connection. So when we run in the red, we live more in the red, disconnection is really scary. So if we think we're being rejected, or we think that we're being like, that's very activating. If we live more in the blue, what's activating is people thinking we're wrong, people thinking we're not competent, people thinking we don't work hard. There's a lot of identity. And there's a lot of neurological reasons why we land there. This is not just us being stubborn if we live there. This is really how our body is wired. We don't have to stay there, though. That's the good news. And again, it varies. Some of us just are a little in the blue. Some of us are really dark blue. And so it's really hard at the dinner table to think of any questions to ask. And we might talk a lot if it's something that we're really interested in, but we don't think to ask people, oh, how are you? And how was your day? And to get into the emotional realm, because we've kind of cut off access to that. And that can be a real disadvantage,
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong, the way we focus on this, that doesn't mean that if we tend to live in the blue, that we don't get hot. Because in the blue, when any of us feels threatened, now there's different ways of responding. In either red or blue, you could disappear. You can just withdraw, right? Cut off, disconnect. So someone in the blue might get extremely angry, but they often get angry for different reasons. And because emotions are threatening to them, they often get really angry when other people are being too sensitive, when other people are being too emotional. And the goal there is to shut that down. It's not necessarily to connect. If we're living in the blue, we forget that connection's important. What we want is peace. And if we have to have peace by just avoiding you altogether or avoiding relationships, so be it. Or we can feel really close to you, but if you get too emotional on me, whether you're in the green or the red, it's going to activate my threat response system if I'm blue. And I don't know that. So in the red, when we're activated hot, it's often about the fear of disconnection. So we feel this pressure to chase somebody or to get that discussion in right this second, because if I let that situation happen and I don't work it out, then I have to sit in disconnection. People that live more in the blue and their whole bodies and nervous system more downregulate, the opposite can be true. What they want is peace, and they want to get away from that irrational other, right? Yep. So they might cut off, walk out midstream, or even farther down, just dissociate, like, just stop hearing it, not caring.
Oof, and frustrating.
Yeah, so hard, isn't it?
So hard. So that's very hard. So we've got the spectrum, right? We've got blue to red. In the middle is the green, the sweet spot. Yes. And then we have the 3R spiral. And I would love for you to explain why they are important. And then maybe give us some tips for how to apply what you've just spoken about, what you've just taught us here and now, like the minute we turn off this podcast. We can go out in the world and feel more relatable to others, more with others, more securely attached to the world.
The 3R spiral is how we change. It's our conceptualization about how we can really make a difference in our life. And the first R is to recognize. If we don't recognize that we're cutting off and that we're disconnecting and that we're not really activating our attachment system enough, we don't even recognize it, then maybe your spouse's complaints that you're disappearing all the time, they're just an annoyance. They don't have any value. You just want to get away from them. So if you can recognize, oh, wait, I live a lot in the blue, which means I'm kind of deactivated. So I stay at work really long, not only because I need the work, it's I'm avoiding connection because it overwhelms me. So if you just recognize it to begin with, that already calms the system. If I recognize I'm on the ceiling and it's actually my high activation, if I have some awareness of it, I've already activated my prefrontal cortex. I've called it into the picture. And if I can just call that into the picture a little, I've already shifted towards a calmer, more secure way of relating. The next step would be to reflect on it. Why is it? So I might think my partner's just complaining about really irrelevant things and I'm sick of it, right? Which is a very common complaint of somebody that lives in the blue. Like she's always complaining, he's always complaining. And if he would just be happy, we would be happy. If she would be happy and quit complaining, that's the sweet spot, right? If you start to then reflect on that instead of just try to stop them, secure relating is all about looking at yourself first. Because if you can look at yourself first and you can shift just a little, you will shift the relationships you're in, I promise. And so if I reflect, wait, why is it that her small complaints are so hard on my body? Why is it that I cut off and get pissed and angry every time they complain? If I can reflect, hey, maybe that's actually an issue for me, you can feel I've already taken it even a deeper step towards secure relating. And if I only just ask that question, my spouse or partner is going to be so relieved and thankful that they're going to be like, oh my God, they're going to be in your lap, right? The next part is rewire. When we do these things over and over and over again, we recognize it and we reflect, and then we have different strategies about how to bring ourselves out of our activated states. We actually literally rewire. We start to do those ski slopes down different paths that are really hard and hard to get to. But the more we do it, the more we do it, the more we let ourselves do things that are uncomfortable and out of our comfort zone, then we start to have these new pathways. And what that means is we're creating new neuropathways. We're creating different experiences of oxytocin, et cetera. So that's the rewiring. So it really does change our whole system.
I like it. I like that it's packaged in these 3 R's, which are easier to remember, right? Recognize, reflect, and rewire. We're nearly out of time, and I would love for you to share with our listeners some quick takeaways or some quick tools or hacks that we could use when we find ourselves being activated in whatever zone that we normally go to, whether it's blue or red, that can help us regulate ourselves, ground, stabilize, and sort of bring that prefrontal cortex back online.
Great question. The 2 things I would suggest holding in mind, one is reflect what's going on for me. Ask yourself, why is this so hard or so scary? Why am I so activated? And that's no matter if you're in the red or the blue. The second thing is to remember co-regulation. That is a term I want people to really think about. What I do in the world impacts what comes at me and how I interpret it. So having those things in mind is huge. So I'll give you quick hacks, but they're going to be a little different. If you run red and you tend to be really preoccupied, like distracted or very vigilant to other people's emotions, and sometimes when you live there, it's hard to make decisions, or you're always polling people and trying to help people feel good. You know, your goal is if everyone around me feels good, whew, I can relax. And sometimes it's really hard to find your own center.
Yeah.
Right. So 2 things. If you're trying to really communicate with somebody, slow down first and go, what is my real ask? Because when we're hot, we tend to complain about what's happening out there. If we can slow down and say, what's my real ask in this? What do I really need? It will hit everybody's body so much better, and you'll get more of what you want instead of recentering. And one way to do that too is that if you're highly activated, remember we said we're right in the moment and we forget anything in the past and the future. It's really important to use your imagination. Your kid stops down the hall and you're angry and that's not right. You're going to chase them down the hall and tell them what's with, right? It's this, and tell them they misunderstood. If you pause, hold, and wait, right? What you're doing is you're telling your body that you can relax, and you're going to give room for co-regulation that's real. And to do that, one suggestion, because it sounds so easy, but it's so not easy, right? I make it like, oh yeah, just pause, just slam the door in your face, just pause. It's not that easy. But one of the things to do in that case is to use your imagination. We're big believers in that. Imagine 3 hours from now. Imagine the next day. Let yourself imagine the past, maybe yesterday, where your kid and you were laughing in the kitchen. When you do that, what you're incorporating in your mind is that there is a past that's more solid and there's a future more solid. It brings you out of that panic in that moment. And that's our goal. is to be engaged, but not from a place, if I don't act now, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
So if I live in the blue, and I'll try to do this really quickly, the activation in the blue is often deactivation, right? So we generally, I'll try to use an example we just did. Like we often use sarcasm for connection. And then we go, oh, God, you're so sensitive, right? If you're activated, another thing that happens is maybe you disappear at work and then it's a pain to come home. What we suggest in that regard, again, imagination, and that is to, when you live there, you want to bring yourself in the present. Because honestly, what you're doing is you've deactivated your attachment system. So when you're at work, bring a picture so that you see that person. And occasionally during the day, look at them and imagine their world. Because what that does is it warms you up and it goes, oh, I wonder what's going on for him or her. And then you could reach out. What you're doing is you're teaching yourself and your body to not just disconnect and to stay connected and to imagine. The other thing I always encourage people that live in the blue is to put somebody else's helmet cam on, because honestly, you know, the helmet cam that when you're biking or
the GoPro.
The GoPro. So what can happen is we're so certain when we're in the blue that our perspective is right. And that most of our engagement is like, if you would just listen to me, you would have no reason to feel all those feelings. And the truth is, if you would just listen to them, they likely wouldn't have so many feelings. And one way to do that is like, imagine the world through their perspective, because you kind of cut that part off and you've gotten a little siloed depending on how far out on the spectrum you are. So put your helmet cam on and go, I wonder what's going on for them. I wonder why they're that upset and how can I help be there with them? And it can change the dynamic immensely.
These are really helpful and simple interventions, perhaps in the beginning, easier said than done, but with practice, that I think that it's doable. This is really doable. And what it creates is more connection, the thing that we really live for, right? At the end of the day.
It's really what I consider like most of our conflicts and fears in the world is about the feeling of both disconnection and lack of belonging. And honestly, I think that's what a lot is going on in our crazy environment and world right now.
Yes.
Right. And so what happens, unfortunately, in that we all have a need for belonging. And when we are highly activated and we're in the most threatened state, which of course our news helps us do, social media, our politicians, scare, our prefrontal cortex is gone, right? Yep. And now we're all of our reactive primitive selves. The first thing that we want to do is we need a tribe. We have to join a tribe. So we start to divide and polarize and start to believe, just like you do with your partner when you're angry, they're evil. And the next morning you go, oh, not so bad. I kind of didn't do great. We're doing that to each other. So
indeed,
the more we can calm our own nervous system, the less we're going to fall into that trap that we're being lured into. And that's divide, be angry, think the other person's evil. That is all very primitive activation in our body. It's not our politics, it's our body.
Yeah, I think that's really, really a point that we really need to pay attention to, that we're operating off some very primitive wiring in this case, that without awareness, we're just going to keep repeating the loop, right?
Right, exactly.
We are out of time. This has been such a fantastic conversation. And this is definitely material worth visiting, everybody, because it will change the way you connect with your partner, with your children, with your families, with your coworkers, with the world. We're talking about secure relating, holding your own in an insecure world. My guest today has been Dr. Ann Kelley, and this is also co-authored with her wife, Sue Marriott. To learn more, please visit therapistuncensored.com, on Facebook at Austin Shrinks. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen on behalf of my guest, Dr. Ann Kelley, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day and remember to be kind to one another. Want to explore more sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by Lisa Cypers-Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the excellent team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.